That target has to be defective, the range employee whispered, staring at the paper in disbelief. Several customers crowded closer, squinting at the tiny mark in the center. One man shook his head and laughed nervously. No way. Nobody does that. The room buzzed with confusion as people argued over what they were seeing. Then, 2 hours earlier, the afternoon sun hung low over the Texas highway as Emily Carter pulled into the parking lot of Lone Star Firearms. Her pickup truck was nearly 15 years old, the paint faded from countless summers under the southern sun. Nothing about the vehicle attracted attention. Nothing about Emily did either. She stepped out wearing worn jeans, brown boots, and a plain gray button-up shirt with the sleeves rolled to her elbows. Her blonde hair was tied back in a simple ponytail. No jewelry, no flashy accessories, no signs that she was anything other than another customer stopping by to buy ammunition on a quiet Saturday afternoon. Inside, the store was busy. Conversations bounced between display cases filled with hunting rifles, scopes, and outdoor gear. A television mounted above the counter played highlights from a shooting competition while customers debated calibers and equipment. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with gun oil drifted through the air. Emily paused near the entrance, taking in the room with a quick glance. It was a habit she had carried for years. She noticed the exits. She noticed the crowded counter. She noticed the small group gathered near a banner advertising the store's monthly precision shooting challenge. Then she quietly walked toward the ammunition section. Nobody paid attention to her at first. That changed the moment she set an old hard rifle case onto a nearby bench. The case was scratched, faded, and covered with years of wear. It looked older than most of the rifles displayed for sale. A young man standing nearby smirked. "That thing belongs in a museum," he joked to his friends. They laughed. Emily didn't react. She continued scanning boxes of ammunition as if she hadn't heard a word. Across the store, Ryan Walker was holding court among a crowd of admirers. At 34, Ryan had become something of a local celebrity. He posted shooting videos online, won regional competitions, and rarely missed an opportunity to remind people about it. Tall, confident, and loud, he enjoyed being the center of attention. The moment he noticed Emily's battered rifle case, he grinned. "Well, that's interesting," he said loudly enough for half the store to hear. Either that rifle survived 3 wars, or somebody forgot to upgrade sometime this century. More laughter followed. Emily calmly picked up 2 boxes of match-grade ammunition and examined the labels. Her expression never changed. A few customers exchanged looks. Most expected some kind of response. An argument. An eye roll. Anything. Instead, she remained completely focused on her shopping. Something about that silence made an older man sitting near the coffee station glance up from his newspaper. He watched her for several seconds. Then his eyes shifted to the weathered rifle case. A strange look crossed his face. Not recognition exactly. More like curiosity. As the laughter continued around the store, he folded his newspaper and leaned forward, studying Emily a little more carefully. For the first time that afternoon, someone in Lone Star Firearms began to wonder if there was more to this quiet woman than anyone realized. The older man was not the only person paying attention anymore. Ryan Walker noticed the glance and smiled to himself. He had spent years learning how to control a room, and one thing he understood better than most was how quickly people followed confidence. If he treated someone like a joke, others usually joined in. He casually walked toward the ammunition aisle with 2 of his friends trailing behind him. Several customers turned to watch. Emily placed another box of ammunition into her shopping basket and continued reading the specifications on a third. Ryan stopped a few feet away. "Let me guess," he said. "You bought that rifle case at a garage sale and figured you would see what all the fuss was about." A few people chuckled. Emily looked up briefly. "No." Her answer was calm and simple. Ryan raised an eyebrow. "No, no." She returned her attention to the box in her hands. The response was so short that it caught him off guard. Normally people either argued or laughed along. She did neither. One of Ryan's friends stepped forward. "You shoot much?" Emily placed the box into her basket. "Sometimes." The answer generated another round of laughter. "Sometimes," Ryan repeated. "That sounds promising." Nearby customers were beginning to slow their shopping just to listen. The atmosphere felt different now. Not hostile. More like a crowd sensing entertainment. Ryan gestured toward the large banner hanging near the range entrance. The monthly precision challenge. $5,000 for the best group of the day. You should enter, he said. Could be fun. Emily glanced toward the banner. I am just here to buy ammunition. Come on, Ryan said. Everybody takes a shot. You never know. Emily picked up her basket. I think I will pass. Ryan smiled wider. Afraid of embarrassing yourself? A younger customer laughed loudly. Another shook his head. The old veteran near the coffee station continued watching without saying a word. Emily started walking toward the checkout counter. Ryan followed. You know, he called after her. There is nothing wrong with being a beginner. Everybody starts somewhere. Emily stopped for the first time. Not because of the comment. Because she had reached the register. She placed her ammunition on the counter and waited patiently while the clerk scanned the boxes. Ryan leaned against the display case. I am trying to help. I appreciate that, Emily said. Then enter the challenge. No thank you. Why not? Emily handed over her identification for the purchase. Because I did not come here for a challenge. The clerk finished scanning the items. That will be $127.40. Emily nodded and reached for her wallet. Ryan looked around at the gathering crowd. He was used to being the center of attention, and he could feel it slipping away. The more Emily refused to react, the more curious people became. He needed something bigger. Tell you what, he announced. If you enter, I will cover the range fee myself. A few customers murmured approval. Someone else added, do it. Another voice joined in. Then another. Soon half the store seemed invested in the outcome. Emily signed the receipt and collected her purchase. For a moment, she simply stood there. The room grew quiet. The old veteran folded his newspaper completely and set it aside. Ryan smiled confidently. He was certain he knew how this story would end. Emily looked toward the range entrance. Then she looked at the weathered rifle case resting on the bench where she had left it. A small sigh escaped her lips. Not frustration. Not nervousness. More like someone realizing an ordinary afternoon was about to become much longer than planned. Finally, she turned back toward Ryan. You really want me to enter? She asked. Ryan grinned. Absolutely. For the first time since entering the store, a faint smile appeared on Emily's face. It lasted less than a second, but the old veteran noticed it immediately, and the expression caused something deep in his memory to stir. For several seconds, nobody said anything. Then Ryan laughed and slapped one of his friends on the shoulder. There we go, he said. I knew we could convince her. The crowd began drifting toward the indoor range entrance, their conversations growing louder with every step. What had started as an ordinary Saturday afternoon was quickly turning into the most interesting thing happening in the store. Emily walked back to the bench and picked up the old rifle case. The motion was smooth and effortless, as though she had lifted it thousands of times before. The older veteran watched closely. Most people never noticed details like that. He did. Years of experience had trained his eyes to pick up small things. The way she carried the case. The way she moved through a crowd without bumping into anyone. The way she never seemed rushed. Ryan pushed open the range door and gestured dramatically. After you. Emily nodded politely and stepped inside. The range stretched nearly 100 yards, brightly lit and climate-controlled. Electronic target systems lined the far wall. Several lanes were already occupied, but customers quickly made room when they realized something unusual was about to happen. Word had spread throughout the building. Even people browsing optics and hunting gear began filtering into the viewing area. Ryan clearly enjoyed the attention. He shook hands with a few customers and exchanged jokes while store employees prepared the challenge paperwork. His confidence filled the room. After all, there was a reason people recognized his name. He had won this competition 3 months in a row. Pictures of his previous targets were displayed near the entrance. Tight groups. Impressive scores. Enough to convince most people they were watching an expert. Emily signed the registration form without asking a single question. The employee behind the counter glanced at the paperwork. You have never entered before? No, first competition? At this store, yes. The employee smiled politely, assuming that answered everything. Ryan overheard the exchange and grinned. Everybody remembers their first competition. More laughter followed. Emily simply collected her lane assignment. The older veteran had moved closer now. He sat on a bench near the observation window, studying her quietly. Something continued bothering him. Not in a negative way. More like a memory he could almost reach but not quite identify. Emily placed the rifle case on a preparation table and opened the latches. The room became noticeably quieter. Several people leaned forward. Inside rested a bolt-action rifle with a simple matte finish. No flashy colors. No expensive custom engraving. No oversized accessories designed to attract attention. It looked practical. Used. Maintained. Ryan glanced inside and shrugged. Nothing special. A few people nodded in agreement. The rifle lacked the visual impact many expected from a serious competitor. Emily removed it carefully and began checking the equipment. Her hands moved with calm precision. She examined the optic, checked the mounting points, verified the settings. Every action was deliberate, every movement economical. No wasted effort. The older veteran narrowed his eyes. That feeling returned again. Familiarity. Recognition. Not of the rifle, of the person handling it. Nearby, Ryan was busy explaining his strategy to anyone willing to listen. Wind calculations, equipment choices, competition history. He sounded more like a commentator than a competitor. Meanwhile, Emily spoke to nobody. She loaded her equipment onto the table and waited. One employee eventually approached with a clipboard. "You will shoot after Ryan." "That is fine. Do you have any questions?" "No." The employee nodded and walked away. Across the range, Ryan prepared for his turn while customers gathered behind the safety glass. Excitement spread through the room. Most expected entertainment. Some expected embarrassment. A few expected Ryan to set another record. Only one person seemed uncertain. The older veteran sat quietly with his arms crossed, unable to shake the growing suspicion that everyone in the building might be making the same mistake. Ryan Walker thrived in silence that belonged to him. As the range officer called his name, he stepped forward with the relaxed confidence of someone who had performed the same routine hundreds of times. Several customers immediately raised their phones. Others moved closer to the observation glass. Ryan acknowledged them with a small wave before settling behind his rifle. "Watch this," one customer whispered. "He is probably going to win again." The range officer reviewed the rules one final time. 5 rounds. 1 target. Best grouping wins. Ryan nodded before the explanation was even finished. He had heard it all before. The electronic target system illuminated downrange, and the room became quiet. Ryan adjusted his position, took a breath, and began. The first shot landed close to center. A few people nodded approvingly. The second appeared almost beside it. The third tightened the grouping further. By the fourth shot, several customers were already smiling. The fifth completed what most people considered an outstanding performance. When the target data appeared on the overhead monitor, applause broke out across the room. Ryan stood and accepted the reaction as naturally as if it were expected. In truth, it was. The group measured well under an inch. Impressive by any standard. One employee shook his head in admiration. "That is going to be hard to beat." Another agreed immediately. "Very hard." Ryan looked toward Emily. "Still want to give it a try?" His tone carried the confidence of a man who believed the outcome had already been decided. Emily glanced at the monitor, studying the results for only a moment. "Nice shooting," she said. The compliment was genuine. That somehow irritated Ryan more than criticism would have. He had expected excuses. Nervousness. Maybe even admiration. Instead, she sounded like someone commenting on the weather. "That is all?" Ryan asked. Emily looked at him. "What else should I say?" A few customers exchanged amused looks. Ryan laughed, but the sound felt forced. "Nothing. Your turn." Emily stepped toward the firing lane, carrying her rifle. The crowd watched carefully now. Some expected a complete beginner. Others expected a respectable effort. Almost nobody expected a serious challenge. The older veteran continued observing from his bench. As Emily prepared her equipment, he noticed something that finally triggered a memory. It was not the rifle. It was not her face. It was the routine. Every motion followed a precise sequence. Check the optic. Confirm the settings. Verify stability. Pause. Observe. Repeat. He had seen that exact pattern before, years earlier, during a training demonstration at a military facility. The memory flashed across his mind and vanished before he could fully grasp it. Emily settled into position. Her movements remained unhurried despite dozens of eyes fixed upon her. The range officer approached. "Ready?" "Yes." "Need any warm-up shots?" "No." The answer drew several surprised looks. Most competitors preferred a few practice rounds. Emily declined without hesitation. The range officer activated a fresh target. "Whenever you are ready." Emily rested her hands lightly on the rifle and looked downrange. Then she became completely still. The transformation was subtle but impossible to miss. The casual customer from the store seemed to disappear. The laughter, conversations, and expectations around her no longer appeared to matter. Even Ryan noticed the change. For the first time all afternoon, he stopped smiling. He could not explain why. He simply felt that something had shifted. Across the room, the older veteran slowly leaned forward. His eyes narrowed. Then a quiet realization began forming in the back of his mind. If he was right, everyone in the building was about to learn that they had spent the last 2 hours laughing at the wrong person. The range seemed quieter than before. Conversations faded into whispers. Even the customers holding their phones appeared less interested in recording and more interested in understanding what they were seeing. Emily remained perfectly still behind the rifle. Seconds passed, then more seconds. To many people in the room, it looked like hesitation. Ryan folded his arms and smirked. Any day now, one of his friends joked. A few people laughed softly. Emily did not react. Her eyes remained fixed downrange. The older veteran watched carefully. He knew exactly what the crowd was misunderstanding. Most inexperienced shooters focused on the trigger. Skilled shooters focused on the target. Experts focused on everything. Breathing, stability, timing, conditions, patience. The difference often looked like inactivity to people who did not know better. Emily finally adjusted her position by less than an inch. Then she settled again. The range officer glanced at the timer. Nearly everyone else would have started by now. Yet something about her composure discouraged interruption. She looked completely comfortable, as if she could remain there all afternoon if necessary. Ryan shifted his weight. The confidence he had displayed earlier was still there, but it no longer felt quite as effortless. The room had begun paying attention to Emily in a different way. Not because she had done something remarkable, because she seemed unaffected by the pressure that usually changed people. One employee leaned toward another. She is either extremely calm or completely lost. His coworker shrugged. We are about to find out. Emily slowly exhaled. The first shot followed. The sound echoed through the range. The electronic target system registered the impact instantly, but the exact placement would not be displayed until the sequence was complete. A few spectators nodded politely. One shot meant nothing. Ryan had already delivered an exceptional performance. Emily remained focused. Another controlled breath. Another shot. Then silence. No celebration. No reaction. No visible emotion. The crowd exchanged uncertain glances. The third shot came after another measured pause. Unlike many competitors, Emily never rushed to build momentum. Each round seemed independent from the one before it. Every action deliberate. Every movement identical. The older veteran felt the memory becoming clearer now. Years ago, he had attended a specialized marksmanship demonstration during a military charity event. One instructor had stood out above everyone else. Not because of flashy speeches. Not because of equipment. Because of discipline. Absolute discipline. The same discipline he was watching now. The fourth shot arrived. Ryan was no longer smiling. He could not identify a mistake. He could not point to a flaw. That unsettled him more than any obvious error would have. Around the room, customers leaned closer to the observation glass. Nobody was laughing anymore. Emily chambered the final round. The range felt frozen. Then came the fifth shot. Silence followed. Complete silence. Emily remained behind the rifle for another moment before finally lifting her head. Her expression had not changed. She stood, engaged the safety, and stepped back from the firing position. The range officer prepared to display the target results. Several customers immediately looked toward the monitor. Ryan looked as well. So did every employee. The screen refreshed, then refreshed again. Confused murmurs spread through the room. One employee frowned. Another stepped closer. Ryan narrowed his eyes. The target displayed a single visible hole near the center. Nothing else. A customer laughed nervously. Wait, that cannot be right. Another pointed at the monitor. Where are the other impacts? More voices joined in. The room filled with questions. Some people believed the system had malfunctioned. Others assumed Emily had missed the target entirely with most of her shots. The range officer stared at the screen in confusion. Emily simply stood beside the table and waited. She did not argue. She did not explain. She did not defend herself. Across the room, the older veteran slowly rose from his seat. For the first time all afternoon, a faint smile appeared on his face. Unlike everyone else, he was no longer confused. The confusion lasted only a few seconds before people started offering explanations. The system glitched, someone said. Another customer pointed at the monitor. It has to be missing 4 impacts. One of Ryan's friends laughed with obvious relief. Well, that settles it. She missed. Several people nodded. It was the easiest explanation. The range officer, however, did not look convinced. He had seen equipment failures before. This did not resemble one. The electronic system showed a clean registration. No error messages. No warnings. Just a single hole near the center of the target. Ryan crossed his arms again, eager to regain control of the moment. Looks like the pressure got to you after all, he said. A few people chuckled. Emily looked at the screen and then at the range officer. Would you like to bring the target in? She asked. Her voice remained calm. The simple question caused the room to quiet once more. The range officer hesitated. Then he nodded. Yes, let us do that. He activated the retrieval system. The target slowly traveled back toward the firing line. Dozens of eyes followed it. The closer it came, the quieter the room became. Ryan still appeared confident, but the certainty behind his expression had weakened. Something about Emily's lack of concern bothered him. Most competitors reacted immediately when they thought they had performed poorly. Excuses, frustration, disappointment. Emily showed none of those things. She stood beside her rifle with the same composed posture she had displayed all afternoon. The target finally reached the inspection table. Several employees gathered around it. Customers leaned over shoulders trying to get a better view. The single hole was clearly visible near the center. One employee picked up the paper and frowned. That is strange. Another stepped closer. What? Look at the edges. The first employee carefully turned the target under the overhead light. The room remained silent. Then the older veteran began walking toward the table. Slowly, purposefully. The crowd parted without realizing why. He stopped beside the employees and studied the paper for several seconds. Then he smiled. Count them, he said quietly. One employee blinked. Count what? The rings. Confused, the employee examined the target more closely. A moment later his eyes widened. The hole did not have the torn appearance of a single impact. The paper around the center showed multiple compressed layers passing through nearly the exact same point. Another employee grabbed a magnifier from the counter. People crowded closer. The magnifier revealed what the naked eye struggled to see. 5 separate entries. 5 rounds. 1 location. Nobody spoke. The room seemed frozen. Ryan stared at the target. Then he looked at the monitor. Then back at the target again. That is impossible, one customer whispered. The older veteran shook his head gently. No, his eyes moved toward Emily. Just extremely rare. The silence deepened. Moments earlier people had been searching for reasons to dismiss her performance. Now they were searching for reasons to explain it. Neither task was proving easy. Emily remained exactly as she had been before the challenge began. Calm, quiet, uninterested in attention. The veteran looked at her for a long moment. Finally, the memory that had been haunting him all afternoon locked into place. He knew where he had seen her before. Not in person, in training reports, competition summaries, marksmanship publications that circulated among military instructors years earlier. The realization sent a chill through him. Ryan noticed the change in the older man's expression. You know her? He asked. The veteran did not answer immediately. His gaze remained fixed on Emily. Around them, customers waited. Employees waited. Even Ryan waited. Then the veteran exhaled slowly and said the words that would change the atmosphere of the entire store. I think all of you should be very careful about assuming she is just another customer. The words landed harder than anyone expected. Conversation stopped immediately. Several customers looked from the veteran to Emily and back again. Ryan forced a laugh. Come on, he said. You are acting like she is some kind of legend. The veteran never took his eyes off Emily. I did not say that. Then what are you saying? Ryan asked. The older man folded his arms. I am saying that people who can put 5 rounds through the same hole do not usually learn that skill on weekends. The room grew even quieter. One employee carefully set the target down as if it had suddenly become something valuable. Another looked at Emily with entirely new eyes. Ryan shifted uncomfortably. For the first time all afternoon, he seemed unsure of himself. If you know something, just say it, one customer called out. The veteran nodded slowly. About 10 years ago, I attended a marksmanship conference in Colorado. Military instructors from around the country were there. Most of them were good. A few were exceptional. There was one name that kept appearing in conversations. He paused. Emily Carter. Several heads turned toward her. Emily sighed softly, not because she was angry, more because she knew where this conversation was heading. Ryan stared. You were telling me she was military? The veteran gave a small shrug. Not just military. He pointed toward the target. People do not produce results like that by accident. A younger customer stepped forward. Wait, Emily Carter. Why does that sound familiar? The veteran smiled faintly. Because if you spend enough time around competitive shooters or military instructors a decade ago, you probably heard the name. Emily finally spoke. That was a long time ago. Her calm response only increased the curiosity in the room. So it is true? Another customer asked. Emily looked at the target. I used to teach marksmanship. The simplicity of the statement stunned everyone. No boasting. No dramatic reveal. Just a simple fact. Ryan blinked. Teach who? Emily hesitated. Various groups. The veteran chuckled quietly. That sounds exactly like her. He turned toward the crowd. The stories I heard were always the same. Somebody underestimated her. Then they learned better. Several customers laughed nervously. The irony was impossible to ignore. Ryan looked around the room and realized the mood had completely changed. Earlier people had laughed with him. Now they were studying Emily. Respect had replaced amusement. One employee picked up the target again. 5 rounds through one hole, he murmured. I still cannot believe it. Believe it, the veteran replied. You are looking at it. Emily began placing her equipment back into the rifle case. The movement surprised everyone. You are leaving? One customer asked. The competition is over, she said. You won, another employee replied. You have to stay for the award presentation. Emily smiled politely. I appreciate it, but I only came here to buy ammunition. The statement triggered a ripple of laughter throughout the room. This time it was different. Nobody was laughing at her. Ryan watched silently as she secured the rifle and closed the case. The confidence that had carried him all afternoon was gone. In its place was something far less comfortable. Realization. He replayed every joke, every comment, every assumption. The veteran walked over to Emily. It is an honor to finally meet you. Emily extended her hand. Nice to meet you too. You know, he said quietly, most people would have enjoyed proving everyone wrong. Emily lifted the rifle case from the table. Maybe. Why did you not? For the first time all afternoon, her smile reached her eyes. Because proving people wrong was never the goal. Then she turned toward the exit, leaving an entire room standing in thoughtful silence behind her. Emily had almost reached the exit when the store owner stepped forward from behind the counter. He was a man in his 60s named Frank Dawson, someone respected by nearly everyone in the local shooting community. Hold on a second, he called. Emily stopped and turned politely. Frank glanced around the room before looking back at her. I have owned this place for 22 years. I have seen state champions, national competitors, law enforcement instructors, and more talented shooters than I can count. He pointed toward the target still resting on the inspection table. I have never seen that. The customers nodded in agreement. A few moments earlier, they had been eager to laugh at the quiet woman with the worn rifle case. Now many of them looked almost embarrassed by how quickly they had judged her. Emily offered a small smile. It was a good day. Frank laughed. A good day? Several people chuckled. Even Ryan managed a reluctant smile. That is what you call it? Frank asked. Emily shrugged. Everyone has good days. The answer only deepened the mystery surrounding her. Most people in the room could not imagine achieving something extraordinary and then speaking about it as casually as discussing the weather. The older veteran stepped beside Frank. That is exactly why people remember her, he said. Not because she talks about her skills. Because she never does. Ryan stared at the floor for a moment before finally walking toward Emily. The room grew quiet again. Several customers watched nervously, unsure how the conversation would unfold. Ryan stopped a few feet away. For the first time all afternoon, there was no arrogance in his posture. No audience-driven confidence. Just honesty. I owe you an apology, he said. Emily looked at him, but said nothing. Actually, Ryan continued, I probably owe you several. A few people laughed softly. He shook his head. I made assumptions the second you walked through the door. Emily remained calm. Most people do. That does not make it right. Ryan glanced toward the target. I thought I knew exactly who you were. And now? Emily asked. Ryan smiled faintly. Now I realize I never had any idea. The admission earned approving nods from several customers. Frank walked behind the counter and returned carrying an envelope. "The prize money," he said. Emily immediately shook her head. "No," Frank looked surprised. "You won. Give it to the junior training program." Several employees exchanged looks. "You are serious?" Frank asked. "Yes." The room fell silent once more. The Youth Marksmanship Program was a small community initiative that helped teach discipline, safety, and responsibility to young shooters. Funding was always limited. Frank looked genuinely moved. "That would help a lot of kids." Emily nodded. "Then it belongs there." The older veteran smiled. "Sounds exactly like something I expected you to say." Ryan laughed quietly. "Now I feel even worse about those jokes." Emily finally laughed as well, and the tension that had filled the building for hours seemed to disappear. Conversations slowly resumed. Customers returned to browsing. Employees returned to work. Yet the atmosphere felt different. People who had entered the store expecting an ordinary Saturday afternoon would leave with a story they would probably tell for years. As Emily lifted her rifle case once more, a younger customer hurried forward. He looked to be about 18. Nervous. Respectful. "Ma'am." Emily stopped. "Yes." "How do you get that good?" The question hung in the air. Everyone nearby paused to hear the answer. Emily thought for a moment. Then she smiled. "You stop trying to impress people." The young man looked confused. "That is it. That is where it starts." With that, she turned and walked out into the fading Texas sunlight. The door closed softly behind her, leaving the room quieter than before. Nobody rushed to speak. Nobody made another joke. Because somewhere between the first laugh and the final shot, everyone in Lone Star Firearms had learned the same lesson. The most capable person in the room is often the one who feels no need to prove it. The highway stretched ahead of Emily Carter as the last light of the Texas evening painted the horizon in shades of gold and orange. Her pickup truck rolled steadily through the quiet countryside, while the events of the afternoon faded further into the distance with every mile. Back at Lone Star Firearms, however, nobody seemed ready to forget what had happened. Long after Emily left, customers remained gathered near the range. Some continued studying the target. Others replayed the moment she stepped behind the rifle. The stories had already started growing. One customer insisted he had never seen anyone remain so calm under pressure. Another claimed he knew immediately she was special. The older veteran smiled whenever he heard that one. He knew better. Most people had not recognized Emily at all. That was the lesson. Frank Dawson eventually framed the target and hung it behind the counter. Not because it represented a record, although many believed it did. He hung it there because it reminded him of something important. Every customer who walked through his doors carried a story nobody else could see. A week later, the framed target became the most talked about item in the store. Customers pointed at it. New visitors asked questions. The employees retold the story, so often they practically memorized every detail. Yet the part people remembered most was not the grouping itself. It was Emily, the woman who never bragged, the woman who never argued, the woman who never felt the need to announce who she was. Ryan Walker returned several days later. For the first time in years, he spent more time listening than talking. He stood in front of the framed target for nearly 10 minutes. Eventually, Frank walked over. "Thinking about it again?" Ryan nodded. "More than I expected." Frank smiled. "That is probably a good thing." Ryan laughed quietly. "You know what bothers me most?" "What?" Ryan looked toward the target. "I spent years trying to prove I was the best shooter in every room." Frank folded his arms. "And?" She walked into the room without caring whether anyone noticed her at all. Frank nodded slowly. "That is because confidence and attention are not the same thing." Ryan stared at the framed paper for another moment. Then he smiled. "I think I finally understand that." Months passed. The youth training program received the donated prize money. New equipment was purchased. More students joined. The story continued spreading through the local shooting community, changing slightly each time it was told. Some details grew larger. Others became smaller. But one fact never changed. Every version ended with the same image. A quiet woman carrying an old rifle case walking away while everyone else stood speechless behind her. Somewhere else in Texas, Emily continued living the same way she always had. No interviews. No social media victory posts. No attempts to capitalize on the attention. She spent her days teaching, practicing, and helping others improve. Exactly as she had done for years. Because the truth was simple. The most important lesson from that afternoon had nothing to do with targets, competitions, or extraordinary skill. It was about judgment. The customers at Lone Star Firearms saw worn boots, a faded truck, and an old rifle case. They believed they understood the entire story. They were wrong. People often are. Real character rarely announces itself. Real confidence rarely demands recognition. And real excellence usually arrives without fanfare. That is why the people who witnessed that afternoon never forgot it. Not because they saw an incredible display of skill, but because they learned how easily appearances can deceive. In the end, Emily Carter left with nothing more than the ammunition she originally came to buy. Yet she walked away having given everyone in that store something far more valuable. A reminder that respect is earned through actions, not appearances, and that the strongest people often have the least need to tell you how strong they are.